When the frosted glass door swung open and Caleb Mercer found himself staring at the half-dressed CEO of Voss Industries, he knew his life was about to change. He just didn't know if it meant fired or something far more dangerous. What started as a maintenance call on the executive floor became a collision between two worlds. His paycheck-to-paycheck existence raising his daughter alone, and Vivian Voss's empire of steel and secrets. Before it was over, he'd save her life twice, risk everything he had, and discover that sometimes the most powerful person in the room needs someone brave enough to see past the armor. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The flickering fluorescent light in Caleb Mercer's bathroom had been dying for 3 weeks, but he couldn't bring himself to fix it. Not because he didn't know how, he'd rewired half the building where he worked, but because every time he looked at the burnt-out bulb, he saw another bill he couldn't pay, another promise to his daughter Rosie that he'd have to break. The light stuttered on at 4:47 a.m., casting shadows across his face as he splashed cold water against his skin and stared at the stranger in the mirror. 32 years old, and he looked 40. The lines around his eyes told stories he wished he could forget, and the calluses on his hands were a roadmap of every job he'd worked to keep a roof over their heads. Behind him, through the thin walls of their cramped apartment, he could hear Rosie breathing softly in her sleep, that gentle rhythm that was the only music that mattered anymore. He'd been 18 when everything fell apart. One positive pregnancy test, one screaming match, one door slamming as Melissa walked out of his life before Rosie even took her first breath. "I'm not ready to be a mother," she'd said, her voice cold and final. "You figure it out." And he had. Somehow, impossibly, he had. 14 years of night classes abandoned, dreams of engineering school packed away in boxes he couldn't afford to store. Every ambition, every possibility, every version of himself that might have been, all of it sacrificed at the altar of diapers and daycare, formula and rent, keeping one small human alive and safe in a world that didn't care if you were drowning. The maintenance job at Voss Industries paid enough to keep them afloat, barely. Caleb had started in the sub-basement 3 years ago, fixing pipes and unclogging drains, invisible to everyone who mattered. He'd worked his way up to general maintenance, which meant slightly better hours and the occasional glimpse of daylight, but it was still a job defined by other people's emergencies and his own exhaustion. His phone buzzed at 5:03 a.m. Caleb's stomach dropped even before he looked at the screen. Early calls were never good news. "Mercer." The voice belonged to Tom Brennan, the day shift supervisor, and he sounded harried. "I need you to handle an emergency call. Executive floor. Electrical issue in the CEO's private office wing." Caleb's hand tightened around the phone. The executive floor was 23 stories above his usual territory, a world of marble and mahogany that maintenance staff entered only when absolutely necessary. He'd been up there exactly twice in 3 years, both times to fix urgent problems while the executives were safely away at lunch or in meetings. The unspoken rule was simple: be invisible, be quick, and don't make eye contact. "Can't Rodriguez take it?" Caleb asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm not scheduled until 7, and I've got to drop Rosie at—" "Rodriguez called in sick. Stevens is handling a flood in the parking garage. You're the only one with electrical clearance who's answering their phone." Tom's voice softened slightly. "I know it's early, Caleb. I know you've got the kid. But this came from the top. CEO herself requested immediate response." Vivian Voss. Even her name carried weight that made the phone feel heavier in Caleb's hand. Everyone at Voss Industries knew the stories. 28 years old and already running a tech empire her father had built over 4 decades. She'd taken over 2 years ago when Harrison Voss suffered a stroke, and the business world had waited for her to fail. Instead, she'd streamlined operations, acquired 3 competitors, and doubled the company's value. The financial press called her a prodigy. The employees called her the Ice Queen, and not with affection. Caleb had seen her exactly once, moving through the lobby like a force of nature in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his rent. She hadn't looked left or right, hadn't acknowledged the people who stepped aside to let her pass. Her face had been perfectly composed, beautiful in a way that seemed deliberately weaponized. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, mahogany hair pulled back in a style that suggested control over every detail. She'd terrified him from 50 feet away. The thought of being in the same room with her made his hands sweat. "Fine," Caleb said, defeat settling into his bones. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. 30? Tom corrected. The email said urgent, whatever that means when it comes from Vivian Voss. Caleb ended the call and stood motionless in his tiny bathroom, the dying light flickering overhead like a warning. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with Rosie's school fees coming due. Not with the landlord already circling about last month's late rent payment. He'd go to the executive floor, fix whatever needed fixing, and disappear back into the basement where he belonged. Simple, safe, survivable. He pulled on his work shirt, navy blue with Voss Industries maintenance embroidered over the pocket, and grabbed his tool belt from the hook by the door. In Rosie's room, he knelt beside her narrow bed and brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake, her small hand curling around the stuffed rabbit he'd found at a thrift store for her 5th birthday. "Love you, sweet girl," he whispered. "Mrs. Chen will get you to school. I'll pick you up after, I promise." How many promises had he made in this room? How many had he managed to keep? Caleb left a note for Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, who watched Rosie most mornings in exchange for help with her leaking sink and broken cabinet hinges. It was a fragile arrangement held together with favors and goodwill, but it was all he had. The bus ride to Voss Tower took 25 minutes through streets still dark with pre-dawn shadows. Caleb watched the city wake up through streaked windows, delivery trucks unloading, coffee shops flickering to life, other people stumbling toward their own obligations and compromises. He wondered how many of them felt like they were drowning too, just trying to keep their heads above water one more day. Voss Tower rose 63 stories into the Seattle sky, all steel and glass, a monument to ambition that seemed to mock everyone who entered through the service entrance. Caleb swiped his maintenance badge and took the freight elevator, watching the numbers climb with a sense of dread that tightened around his chest. Basement levels. Ground floor. The numbers kept rising, carrying him away from familiar territory. The executive floor was quiet at 5:38 a.m., the kind of profound silence that only existed in spaces where powerful people made decisions that changed lives without ever seeing the faces of those affected. Caleb's footsteps echoed on marble floors so polished he could see his reflection, a ghost in work boots carrying a tool bag that seemed suddenly shabby against the backdrop of luxury. The work order said CEO's private office wing, electrical malfunction, lights and switches unresponsive. Caleb followed the corridor past conference rooms with walls made entirely of glass, past abstract art that probably cost more than he'd earn in 5 years, past doorways that led to worlds he'd never be invited to enter. The CEO's wing occupied the corner of the building, separated from the rest of the executive floor by a reception area that looked like something from an architecture magazine. The lights were indeed out, leaving the space dim except for the gray wash of dawn creeping through floor-to-ceiling windows. Caleb found the electrical panel behind a mahogany door that blended seamlessly into the wall. Someone had labeled it in small brass letters, "Authorized personnel only." He was authorized, technically, though he'd never felt less like he belonged anywhere. The panel revealed the problem immediately, a tripped breaker, probably from a power surge. Simple fix. 5 minutes of work. Caleb reset the breaker and heard the satisfying hum of electricity flowing through the system. Lights flickered on throughout the wing, and he allowed himself a moment of relief. Then he heard it. A voice from somewhere deeper in the office suite, female and sharp with frustration. Finally! What took so long? Caleb's stomach clenched. He'd assumed the floor would be empty this early, that he'd have the place to himself. The realization that Vivian Voss was already here, already working while the rest of the city slept, made him want to disappear into the walls. "Just needed to reset the breaker, ma'am," he called back, keeping his voice professional and distant. "Everything should be working now. I'll just test the switches to make sure." "Do it quickly. I have a press conference in 2 hours and I need to change." Caleb moved through the reception area, testing light switches as he went. Each one responded perfectly, flooding the space with warm light that made the artwork glow and the marble gleam. He was thorough but fast, wanting nothing more than to finish and escape back to the maintenance levels. The executive suite had 3 main areas: the reception space, a large conference room, and what had to be Vivian's private office. 2 of the 3 doors were open. The third, made of frosted glass that turned everything behind it into soft shadows, was closed. Caleb tested the switches outside the conference room, then moved toward the office. There was one more switch by the frosted door, a master control that probably operated the office lights. He flipped it, heard the click of response, and reached for the door handle without thinking. It was instinct. A maintenance worker's reflex after 3 years of checking, testing, verifying. His hand was on the frosted glass, pushing it open, before his brain registered what he was doing. The door swung inward. Caleb Mercer's life changed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Vivian Voss stood in the center of her office, frozen in the act of pulling a fresh blouse from a garment bag. She wore a black skirt and nothing else above the waist except a bra so delicate it seemed barely there. Her mahogany hair was down, falling in waves across bare shoulders, and her dark eyes went wide with shock that matched the horror flooding through Caleb's veins. For one endless second, neither of them moved. Caleb's tool bag hit the floor with a crash that shattered the silence. "I'm sorry," he gasped, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I'm so sorry. I was just testing the lights. I didn't mean to—" "Get out!" Her voice was ice over steel, quiet, and absolutely lethal. "I'm sorry," Caleb said again, backing away so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. His face burned with humiliation, his heart hammering against his ribs. "The door. I thought it was empty. I was just checking the switches. I'm so sorry." "Turn around." The command stopped him mid-retreat. "Now!" Caleb spun so fast he felt dizzy, facing the frosted glass and the blurred shapes of the reception area beyond. Behind him, he heard the whisper of fabric, the sharp zip of the garment bag. Every muscle in his body was locked rigid, waiting for the explosion, the rage, the inevitable consequences of the worst mistake of his professional life. He'd walked in on Vivian Voss half-dressed, the CEO. The woman who could end his career with a single phone call. The woman who held his entire fragile existence in her perfectly manicured hands. "I swear I didn't see anything," he said to the frosted glass, his voice cracking. "I swear. I was just doing my job, testing the circuits. I didn't know you were in here. Please. I have a daughter. I need this job. Be quiet." Caleb's jaw snapped shut. He could hear his own breathing, ragged and panicked, and beneath it the soft sounds of Vivian dressing. Seconds stretched into eternities. His entire body felt like a live wire, crackling with fear and shame. When she finally spoke again, her voice was controlled but carried something underneath that he couldn't quite identify. "What's your name?" "Caleb Mercer, ma'am. Maintenance staff, electrical clearance." The words came out like a prisoner reciting his crimes. "I've worked here 3 years. I've never had a complaint. I swear this was an accident. I thought the office was empty. I heard you the first time." A pause. "You can turn around now." Caleb turned slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. Vivian Voss stood behind her desk, now fully dressed in a cream blouse and the same black skirt. Her hair was pulled back in the severe style he recognized from that glimpse in the lobby months ago. She looked every inch the CEO again, all traces of vulnerability erased. But her dark eyes studied him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Look at me," she said. It was the hardest thing Caleb had ever done. Meeting Vivian Voss's gaze felt like staring into a searchlight, but he forced himself to do it. She deserved that much at least. An acknowledgement of what he'd done. An acceptance of whatever judgment she was about to deliver. Her face was unreadable, a mask of perfect control. But something flickered in her eyes as she looked at him. Not anger exactly. Something more complicated. "You really didn't know I was here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am, I swear. The work order just said electrical malfunction. I reset the breaker, and I was testing all the switches. I thought the whole floor was empty this early." Caleb's hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists at his sides. "I understand if you need to fire me. I understand I don't have any excuse. I just want you to know it was an accident. I would never—" "Stop talking." He stopped. Vivian walked around her desk with measured steps, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something subtle, and expensive that made the air between them feel charged with electricity. "You're terrified," she observed, her voice softer now, almost curious. "Yes, ma'am." "Of me or of losing your job?" "Both." The truth fell out before he could stop it. "Mostly of losing my job. I have a daughter. She's 6. I'm all she has. I can't—" His voice cracked and he forced himself to breathe. "I can't afford to lose this." Vivian's expression shifted, something almost like recognition passing across her face. She studied him for another long moment, and Caleb felt like he was being cataloged, assessed, measured against some criteria he couldn't begin to understand. "The door was unlocked," she said finally. "I should have secured it. That's on me, not you." Caleb blinked, certain he'd heard wrong. "Ma'am?" "You were doing your job, testing the electrical system. I was careless." She turned away, moving back to her desk with that same controlled grace. "What you saw stays between us. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I would never say anything to anyone, I swear." "Good." She picked up a tablet from her desk, her attention already shifting to whatever waited in her schedule. "Finish your testing and get out. Send your supervisor a report that everything's functioning normally." Caleb stood rooted to the spot, unable to process what was happening. She wasn't firing him. She wasn't even yelling at him. He'd braced for disaster and instead found something he didn't have a name for. "Ma'am?" The word came out before he could stop it. "I really am sorry." Vivian looked up from her tablet, and for just a second her mask slipped. What he saw underneath wasn't anger or ice or any of the things he'd expected. It was exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that recognized itself in another person. "I know you are," she said quietly. "Now go." Caleb grabbed his tool bag and fled, his legs unsteady as he escaped from the office. He tested the remaining switches with shaking hands, documented everything on his phone, and made it to the elevator before his knees gave out. He leaned against the cool metal wall, his heart still racing, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd let him go. She'd seen his terror, heard his desperation about his daughter, and she'd chosen mercy over the punishment he deserved. Why? The question followed him all the way back to the basement, through the morning's remaining work orders, through the mechanical routine of fixing broken things while his mind spun in circles. He picked up Rosie from school at 3, listened to her excited chatter about the art project she'd made, helped her with homework while heating up pasta for dinner. Normal things. Safe things. The rhythm of their life together. But underneath it all, he kept seeing Vivian Voss's face in that moment when her mask slipped. Kept hearing the quiet acknowledgement in her voice when she'd said, "I know you are." 2 days passed. Caleb reported for his shifts, kept his head down, and tried to convince himself the incident was behind him. The executive floor might as well have been on another planet. He fixed a leaking pipe in the 4th-floor bathroom, replaced fluorescent tubes in the 2nd-floor conference room, unclogged a drain in the cafeteria. Invisible work for invisible people. Then, on Thursday afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message from HR. "Caleb Mercer, please report to Human Resources immediately, 4th floor, suite 400. His stomach dropped through the floor. This was it. They decided to fire him after all. Probably wanted to do it officially, with paperwork and witnesses. He should have known the reprieve was temporary. The HR suite was all neutral colors and uncomfortable furniture designed to make difficult conversations slightly less awful. The receptionist barely looked up when Caleb gave his name, just gestured toward a conference room where a woman in a gray pantsuit waited with a folder. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Patricia Kemp, HR Director. Please, sit down." Caleb sat, his hands gripping his knees. "If this is about Monday morning, I can explain. This isn't disciplinary, Mr. Mercer." Patricia opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a position transfer." The words didn't make sense. Caleb stared at the paper, trying to force his brain to process what he was seeing. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned from general maintenance to direct support technician for the executive floor. It's a permanent position with a significant salary increase and enhanced benefits package." Caleb's vision blurred. The numbers on the page swam. "I don't understand." The position was created specifically based on a recommendation from Ms. Voss herself. She indicated that the executive floor requires dedicated technical support with electrical expertise, and Patricia consulted her notes. Demonstrated discretion and reliability under pressure. Ms. Voss recommended me? The words came out strangled. That's correct. The salary is detailed on page 2. You'll also receive health insurance that covers dependents, which I understand is relevant given your daughter. Patricia's professional demeanor softened slightly. This is a good opportunity, Mr. Mercer. The executive floor position comes with better hours, better benefits, and direct exposure to company leadership. If you perform well, it could open doors. Doors. The word felt like a foreign language. Caleb looked down at the numbers again. The salary was almost double what he currently made. The health insurance would cover Rosie's dental work she needed. The hours meant he could drop her off at school every morning and pick her up every afternoon. It was everything he needed, everything he'd been drowning for lack of. And it came from Vivian Voss. I don't understand why, he said quietly, after what happened. Ms. Voss's recommendations don't require explanation, Patricia interrupted smoothly. Do you accept the position or not? What choice did he have? What choice had he ever had? Yes, Caleb said. I accept. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Patricia explained his new responsibilities, maintaining all electrical, HVAC, and general facilities systems on the executive floor, responding to immediate needs, conducting preventive maintenance, and being available for any technical issues that arose. He'd report directly to Tom Brennan still, but his primary location would be the 23rd floor, the executive floor, where Vivian Voss worked. You start Monday morning, Patricia said, handing him a new badge with Executive Support Services printed beneath his name. Report to the executive reception desk at 7 a.m. Ms. Voss's assistant will brief you on protocols and expectations. Caleb took the badge with numb fingers. His reflection stared back at him from the laminated surface, and he barely recognized himself. That night, after Rosie was asleep, he sat at their tiny kitchen table and stared at the paperwork. The salary increase alone would change everything. He could pay rent on time, could fix the leaking faucet in their bathroom, could buy Rosie new shoes instead of praying the old ones lasted another month, could breathe, maybe, for the first time in 6 years. But why had Vivian Voss done this? He'd walked in on her at her most vulnerable, had seen her stripped of the armor she wore to face the world. By every logical calculation, she should have wanted him as far away as possible. Instead, she'd promoted him, brought him closer. Caleb thought about that moment in her office when she'd looked at him and her mask had slipped. That flash of recognition, like she'd seen something in his desperation that resonated with her own hidden truths. Demonstrated discretion, Patricia had said. That's what Vivian valued. Not his technical skills, those were common enough. She valued his silence, his terror, his understanding that some secrets were worth protecting. She needed someone who wouldn't talk, someone who'd proven himself capable of keeping his mouth shut when it mattered most. And maybe, just maybe, she'd seen something else too. The raw need in his voice when he'd begged for his job, the mention of his daughter, the visible evidence that he was holding his life together with desperation and duct tape. Maybe that had touched something in the Ice Queen's carefully controlled world, or maybe Caleb was romanticizing an act of pure pragmatism. Either way, Monday morning would come, and with it, a new life on the executive floor, working in daily proximity to a woman who terrified and confused him in equal measure. He went to bed, but didn't sleep. Instead, he lay in the darkness listening to Rosie breathe and wondering what exactly he'd agreed to when he signed those papers. The old fluorescent light in the bathroom finally died completely that night. But for once, Caleb didn't see it as another failure, another thing he couldn't afford to fix. He saw it as a sign that something was ending, and something else, something he couldn't yet name, was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability, and Caleb stood outside Voss Tower at 6:45 a.m., watching his reflection waver in the glass facade. The new badge felt heavy in his pocket, a small piece of plastic that somehow represented the distance between who he'd been last week and who he was supposed to become today. He dropped Rosie at school early, endured her questions about why he looked so nervous, promised her they'd celebrate his new position with pizza Friday night. She'd hugged him extra tight before running to join her friends, and the warmth of that small body against his chest was the only thing keeping him from turning around and walking away. The executive floor at 7 a.m. was a different world than the silent space he'd encountered during the emergency call. Now, it hummed with controlled energy. Assistants arranging schedules, junior executives clutching coffee like lifelines, the soft ping of elevator arrivals delivering the day's first wave of ambition and anxiety. Caleb felt immediately out of place, a maintenance worker in navy blue surrounded by tailored suits and clicking heels. The reception desk curved along one wall like a spaceship console, all blonde wood and embedded screens. The woman behind it looked up as he approached, her smile professional but not unkind. "Caleb Mercer," he said, showing his new badge. "I'm supposed to report here for Executive Support Services." "Yes, we've been expecting you." She tapped something on her screen. "I'm Jennifer. You'll be working primarily with me for coordination. Ms. Voss's executive assistant, Amanda Chen, will brief you on protocols in a moment. She's just finishing with the morning briefing." Jennifer gestured toward a seating area that looked like it belonged in an art gallery. Caleb perched on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, his tool bag resting between his boots. Around him, the executive floor continued its choreographed dance. People moved with purpose, their conversations happening in low tones that suggested everything discussed was confidential and crucial. He caught glimpses through glass walls. Conference rooms where early meetings were already underway. Offices where senior executives stared at multiple screens. The physical manifestation of power that flowed through this building like electricity through circuits. And somewhere beyond it all, behind doors he couldn't see, Vivian Voss was beginning her day. "Mr. Mercer?" Caleb stood quickly, nearly knocking over his tool bag. The woman who'd spoken was in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray, with sharp eyes that assessed him in a single glance. "I'm Amanda Chen, Ms. Voss's executive assistant. Follow me, please." She moved like someone who'd learned to navigate these hallways in her sleep. Caleb followed, acutely aware of how his work boots sounded against the marble compared to her nearly silent heels. They passed through the main executive area into a corridor he recognized from his emergency call, the path to Vivian's private wing. His pulse quickened despite himself. Amanda led him to a small office he hadn't noticed during his first visit, tucked discreetly near the electrical panel. It was modest by executive floor standards, but palatial compared to the basement break room where he usually left his things. A desk, comfortable chair, built-in cabinets for equipment, and a window that actually showed the city below. "This is your workspace," Amanda said briskly. "You'll maintain all systems on this floor, with priority given to Ms. Voss's immediate area. Response time for her requests is 10 minutes maximum. All other issues should be resolved within the hour unless they require parts or outside contractors." She handed him a tablet. "This links to the building management system. You'll receive all work orders here, along with Ms. Voss's schedule, so you can plan maintenance around her meetings and commitments. That schedule is confidential. You don't discuss it with anyone, including other maintenance staff." "Understood," Caleb said, taking the tablet carefully. "Ms. Voss values 3 things above all else: discretion, efficiency, and invisibility." Amanda's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering information he needed to survive. "Your work should be seamless. She shouldn't have to think about whether the lights work or the temperature is comfortable. If she notices you at all, it should be because you've solved a problem before it became her problem." The irony of being told to be invisible by the woman whose boss had personally promoted him wasn't lost on Caleb. He kept his expression neutral and nodded. "Questions?" Amanda asked. 1,000 of them, none he could actually voice. "No, ma'am." "Good. There's a staff briefing every morning at 6:45 in the main conference room. You're expected to attend. It covers the day's schedule and any VIP visits that might affect your work. Start your systems check at 7:30. Ms. Voss arrives between 8 o'clock and 8:30, and everything should be perfect before she walks through that door." Amanda paused, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Voss doesn't make recommendations lightly, Mr. Mercer. She saw something in you that made her believe you belong up here. I suggest you prove her right." Before Caleb could respond, Amanda was gone, her departure as efficient as everything else about her. He stood alone in his new office, surrounded by the trappings of a life he'd never imagined. and wondered what exactly Vivian Voss had seen. The first week passed in a blur of learning protocols and staying out of sight. Caleb memorized the building management system, familiarized himself with every circuit breaker and HVAC control, and discovered that the executive floor had more technology packed into a single level than the rest of the building combined. Smart glass that adjusted for light levels, climate controls that responded to occupancy sensors, conference room systems that cost more than luxury cars. He attended the morning briefings and learned to decode the careful language Amanda used to describe Vivian's schedule. Ms. Voss requires uninterrupted focus time meant keep the entire wing silent. Board members visiting from New York meant everything needed to be perfect to the point of obsession. Press conference in the main auditorium meant Vivian would be on edge, her standards impossibly high. And through it all, Caleb caught only glimpses of her. A flash of mahogany hair as she strode past, her voice carrying through a conference room door, crisp with authority. Once, he was replacing a malfunctioning light fixture in the hallway when she emerged from a meeting, and their eyes met for half a second before she looked away and continued walking. She gave no sign of recognition, no acknowledgement that he existed beyond his function as the person who kept her world running smoothly. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like standing in a room where all the air had been sucked out. Caleb told himself it was better this way. Professional, clean. He was here to do a job, collect a paycheck that was transforming his daughter's life, and maintain the discretion Vivian valued so highly. That moment in her office, when he'd seen vulnerability crack through her armor, was an aberration. A mistake they were both pretending had never happened. But late at night, lying awake in his apartment that suddenly felt less cramped thanks to the breathing room in his budget, Caleb couldn't stop thinking about the question that had haunted him since he signed the transfer papers. Why had she really promoted him? The answer came on his 8th day, in a moment that redefined everything he thought he understood. It was late afternoon, almost 6 p.m., and the executive floor was emptying as people departed for dinner meetings or headed home to families and lives that existed beyond these walls. Caleb was in the main conference room, testing a video system that had glitched during a presentation that morning. The technology was sophisticated enough that the manual read like a foreign language, but he'd spent 2 hours breaking down each component until he found the faulty HDMI processor. He was on his back under the conference table, rewiring connections, when he heard voices approaching. "I don't care what the legal team says." Vivian's voice cut through the air like a blade. "We're not settling. Marshall knew exactly what he was doing when he violated that non-compete." "Vivian, the optics alone." A male voice, older, trying for reason. "The optics of backing down are worse. We set a precedent here. Every executive we've ever signed walks away thinking they can steal our clients, and we'll just negotiate a settlement." Heels clicked closer. "Schedule the deposition. I want him on record lying about his intentions." They entered the conference room and Caleb froze under the table. He could see expensive shoes, Vivian's black heels, a man's polished Oxfords. The door closed with a soft click. "You're being unreasonably aggressive about this," the man said. Caleb recognized the voice now. Richard Keller, one of the senior board members. "Marshall was your father's hire. Going after him publicly damages Harrison's legacy." "My father's legacy is secured by the company's success, not by protecting executives who betray us." Vivian's voice was ice cold. "Or are you suggesting I should prioritize sentiment over strategy, Richard?" "I'm suggesting you remember that some of us have been with this company since before you were born. Your father trusted Marshall. Perhaps you should consider whether your judgment, my judgment, has increased this company's value by 42% in 2 years. My judgment acquired Techline and Meridian when everyone said we were overextending. My judgment—" She stopped abruptly. "Is someone in here?" Caleb's heart stopped. He'd been so still, barely breathing, but somehow she'd sensed him. "The maintenance technician, I believe," Richard said, and Caleb could hear the disdain in his voice. "Perhaps you should have him escorted out before we continue discussing confidential matters." Silence stretched for 3 beats of Caleb's racing heart. "Mercer," Vivian said, not a question, a statement. Caleb slid out from under the table, tool bag in hand, his face burning. "I'm sorry. I was fixing the video system. I didn't mean to intrude on—" Did you hear our conversation? Richard demanded. I heard voices, Caleb said carefully, meeting Vivian's eyes despite every instinct screaming at him to look away. I didn't listen. It was a distinction without a difference, and they all knew it. Richard's expression said he expected immediate dismissal, but Vivian just studied Caleb with that same unreadable intensity he'd seen in her office. Finish your work, she said quietly. Then leave. Yes, ma'am. Caleb turned back to the video system with shaking hands, hyper-aware of the conversation continuing in low tones behind him. He worked as quickly as possible, testing connections, verifying the repair. Every second felt like an eternity. When he finally packed up his tools and headed for the door, Richard was mid-sentence about shareholder concerns. Neither of them acknowledged Caleb's departure. He made it to his small office and leaned against the closed door, his pulse hammering. The smart thing would be to go home, forget what he'd heard, and never mention it to anyone. Discretion. That's what Vivian valued. But the look in her eyes when she'd realized he was there, that hadn't been anger. It had been calculation, like she was testing him, measuring him against some standard he didn't understand. Caleb stayed late that night, running diagnostics on systems that didn't need checking, unable to shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Around 8 p.m., when the executive floor was dark and silent except for the glow of emergency lighting, his tablet pinged with a message. It was from Vivian's private email, sent directly to his work account. Your discretion is noted and appreciated, VV. 7 words. No explanation, no context. But Caleb stared at them until his eyes blurred, trying to decode the meaning underneath. She'd been testing him. Deliberately? Or had she simply seized an opportunity when it presented itself? Either way, she'd watched him overhear a confidential conversation and choose silence, and she'd acknowledged it. The message felt like a door opening, or maybe a trap being set. Caleb couldn't tell which, and the uncertainty kept him awake long after he made it home to his quiet apartment. The following week, Vivian requested him by name for the first time. The work order came through his tablet at 2:37 p.m. Temperature control malfunction in CEO office. Immediate response required. Caleb grabbed his equipment and made it to Vivian's wing in under 8 minutes. Amanda intercepted him at the entrance, her expression tight with concern. She's been in back-to-back video conferences for 3 hours, Amanda said quietly. The AC cut out 40 minutes ago and the room's getting uncomfortable. Fix it quickly and quietly. Vivian's office door was open, and he could hear her voice as he approached, still crisp and controlled despite what had to be stifling heat. I understand your concerns about the timeline, David. What I need you to understand is that the board won't approve additional delays. We launch in 6 weeks regardless of... Caleb slipped into the office, keeping to the perimeter, making himself as invisible as possible. The temperature was indeed uncomfortable, at least 78 degrees and climbing. Vivian sat behind her massive desk, facing a wall of screens showing various video conference participants. She didn't acknowledge his presence, but he saw her shoulders relax fractionally. The thermostat was mounted behind a panel that matched the wall perfectly. Caleb opened it silently and ran diagnostics on his tablet. The problem was immediately obvious: a failed sensor sending incorrect readings to the climate control system. He had a replacement in his bag, always carried extras of the most common failure points. We've been over this, Vivian said to the screens. Marketing doesn't drive the launch schedule. Product readiness does. If your team can't deliver the campaign materials by week 4, we'll find someone who can. Caleb worked in absolute silence, replacing the sensor, recalibrating the system, testing the response. Cool air began flowing through the vents within minutes. He allowed himself a glance toward Vivian and found her watching him in the reflection of her darkened screens, her eyes tracking his movements even as she verbally dismantled someone's excuses. Much better, she said into the conference call. Now that we can all think clearly again, let's discuss realistic deliverables. It wasn't about the temperature. She was talking to him, acknowledging the fix without breaking her focus on the meeting. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of competence between two professionals who understood their roles. He packed up his tools and left as quietly as he'd entered. 10 minutes later, another message appeared on his tablet. Efficient work. Thank you. 3 days after that, she asked for him again. A malfunctioning outlet in her private conference room discovered 15 minutes before a meeting with potential investors. Caleb replaced the outlet in under 10 minutes while Vivian reviewed presentation materials at the table, her presence a constant weight in his peripheral vision. Then again, a flickering light above her desk that she said was disrupting her focus during late-night work sessions. A coffee maker in her private kitchen that refused to function. A loose door handle that caught on her sleeve. Small things. Easily fixed. But each request came directly from her, bypassing the normal work order system. And each one felt like another layer of something being built between them. Not friendship, not exactly trust, something more complicated. Caleb began to understand the real reason she'd promoted him. It wasn't just about his discretion regarding what had happened in her office. It was about reliability. Vivian Voss had built her entire life around control, and she needed someone in her immediate environment who could solve problems efficiently without requiring management or explanation. She needed someone who understood what she needed before she had to ask for it. He started anticipating issues, noticed when the temperature in her wing fluctuated and adjusted it before she felt the change. Identified a pattern in the lighting system that caused a brief flicker every third day and replaced the timer module. Kept spare parts for every system she used regularly, stored in his office for immediate access. And slowly, incrementally, the Ice Queen began to thaw in his presence. It started with simple acknowledgments, a nod when he arrived to fix something, a quiet thank you when he left, then actual words beyond professional courtesy. "You're here early," she said one morning when he arrived to replace a faulty smoke detector before she got in. "Wanted to finish before your first meeting," Caleb replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Amanda mentioned you have investors at 8:30. You read the briefings." It wasn't a question, but he heard approval underneath. "Helps me plan my work around your schedule." Vivian had been reviewing something on her tablet, but she looked up at that, studying him with those dark eyes that still made his pulse quicken. "Most people on my staff do the minimum required and nothing more. Why don't you?" The question caught him off guard. Caleb secured the new smoke detector before answering, giving himself time to choose his words carefully. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "She deserves better than minimum effort. This job, what you did for me, giving me this position, it changed our lives. Seemed like the least I could do was earn it." Something flickered across Vivian's face, too quick to identify. "Your daughter, she's 6? "Yes, ma'am. Rosie." The name felt intimate somehow, personal in a way that made him hesitate. But Vivian was watching him expectantly. "She's in first grade, loves art and hates math homework. Wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up." "Just the two of you?" "Just us," Caleb confirmed. "Her mother left before she was born. It's been me and Rosie against the world ever since." Vivian was quiet for a moment, her expression unreadable. "That must be difficult." "It's everything," Caleb said simply. Then because she'd opened the door, "What about you? Is there—" He stopped, realizing too late he was crossing a line. But Vivian smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips that transformed her face for just a second. "No one," she said. "Building an empire doesn't leave much time for personal entanglements, and most people want something from me. Power, connections, proximity to success. It becomes difficult to know what's real." The honesty in her voice startled him. This was vulnerability, genuine and offered freely, and Caleb didn't know what to do with it. "I can't imagine what that's like," he said quietly. "Not trusting people's intentions." "Can't you?" Vivian's eyes held his. "You trusted your daughter's mother. She left. Now you raise Rosie alone, working yourself to exhaustion to provide for her. I'd imagine trust is complicated for you too." She was right. The recognition settled between them, an understanding that neither of them had expected to find here, in her office at 7:15 in the morning, while he stood on a ladder replacing a smoke detector. "I should finish this," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Yes," Vivian agreed, but she didn't leave. She stayed there, working on her tablet while he completed the installation, and her presence felt less like surveillance and more like companionship. When he climbed down and packed his tools, she looked up one more time. "Thank you, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his first name. The sound of it in her voice rewired something in his brain, created a connection he wasn't sure he wanted and definitely didn't know how to handle. "Anytime, Miss Voss." He left before he could say something stupid, but he felt her watching him all the way to the door. The day everything changed started ordinarily enough. Caleb arrived at 6:30 for the morning briefing, coffee in hand, prepared for another day of invisible efficiency. Amanda ran through the schedule with her usual precision: video conferences, department reviews, a site visit from a tech journalist, and an all-hands presentation at 4 p.m. in the main auditorium. "The presentation is particularly important," Amanda emphasized. "Ms. Voss will announce the new product line. There will be press, investors, and all senior staff. Everything needs to be perfect." Caleb made notes on his tablet. The auditorium was technically outside his jurisdiction, but he coordinated with the facilities team to ensure all executive floor systems would be stable during the event. Vivian would be under intense scrutiny, and the last thing she needed was a technical failure making her look unprepared. The morning proceeded smoothly. He handled routine maintenance, responded to a minor printer malfunction in the finance director's office, and replaced a burned-out LED in one of the conference rooms. Around 2 p.m., he decided to check the auditorium personally, just to verify everything the facilities team had reported. The main auditorium seated 300 people and featured a stage with professional lighting, video screens, and sound systems sophisticated enough for concert venues. The facilities team had done good work. Everything looked pristine, the technology tested and ready. Caleb was about to leave when something made him look up at the lighting rig. Years of maintenance work had trained his eyes to spot things that weren't quite right, subtle misalignments that suggested potential problems. One of the stage lights looked off-center, its mounting bracket slightly twisted. He found a ladder and climbed up to inspect it. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The safety cable, the backup that prevented lights from falling if the main mount failed, was frayed nearly through. Not from age or wear, but from what looked like deliberate cutting. Someone had sawed through most of the cable, leaving just enough intact that it wouldn't be immediately obvious but would fail under the right stress. And the main mounting bolt was loose, turned back several threads, held in place by friction alone. Caleb's hand shook as he examined the setup. This wasn't accident or neglect. This was sabotage. The light weighed at least 40 pounds. If it fell during the presentation, directly onto the stage where Vivian would be standing, he didn't let himself finish the thought. Working quickly, he secured the mounting bolt properly, tested the weight distribution, and replaced the safety cable entirely. Then he checked every other light in the rig, found 2 more with loosened bolts, and secured them all. By the time he finished, he'd been in the auditorium for 90 minutes, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. The question burning in his mind was whether to report this. Tell Amanda. Security? If this was deliberate sabotage, there were protocols, investigations, potential danger to Vivian that extended beyond a rigged light fixture, but he had no proof beyond his professional judgment. The frayed cable could theoretically be explained as wear. The loose bolts might be attributed to poor maintenance, and if he was wrong, if he raised alarms that led nowhere, he'd look paranoid or attention-seeking. Worse, he'd put himself directly in Vivian's line of sight in a way that violated everything she valued about him. She needed him to be invisible, to solve problems quietly, not to create drama. Caleb made his decision. He documented everything with photos on his tablet, secured the systems, and made a note to check them again before the presentation. Then he went back to the executive floor and tried to act like his heart wasn't racing. At 3:30, Amanda sent a message asking him to verify the video feeds in the auditorium one final time. Caleb went back down, checked the lights again, still secure, and confirmed all systems were operational. People were already filling the seats. Press photographers set up cameras. The energy in the room built like a gathering storm. Vivian arrived at 3:55, flanked by Amanda and 2 senior executives. She wore a deep blue suit that commanded attention, her hair pulled back severely, her expression calm and confident. Caleb watched from the shadows at the back of the auditorium as she took the stage, tested the microphone, and surveyed the crowd with the control of someone who owned every room she entered. Their eyes met across the distance. Vivian's gaze held his for just a moment, something passing between them that might have been acknowledgement or might have been his imagination. Then she turned her attention to her notes, and Caleb forced himself to breathe. The presentation began. Vivian spoke with the kind of authority that made people lean forward, her voice carrying perfectly through the sound system. She outlined the new product line with precision, fielded questions from journalists with sharp intelligence, commanded the stage like she'd been born to it. Caleb stood near the lighting controls, watching not the presentation but the equipment. The stage lights held steady. The video screens displayed perfectly. Everything was working exactly as it should. He started to relax. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the damage he'd found was just neglect after all, coincidence and poor maintenance rather than malicious intent. Maybe... The light directly above center stage shifted. It was subtle, a slight rotation on its mount, but Caleb saw it immediately. His blood turned to ice. Someone was in the lighting catwalk above the stage. He could see movement in the shadows, a figure adjusting something he couldn't quite make out. Caleb moved before thinking, racing toward the stage access stairs. He had to get up there, had to stop whatever was happening, but the stairs were on the opposite side of the auditorium, and Vivian was directly under that light, still speaking, unaware of the danger gathering above her. The light shifted again, rotated further. The sabotaged mount he'd fixed was holding, but now someone was actively working to override the safety measures. Caleb abandoned stealth and ran, his boots pounding against the auditorium floor, drawing attention from the crowd. He saw security guards starting to move, confused by the commotion. Saw Amanda's startled face. Saw Vivian pause mid-sentence, her eyes finding him in the crowd. "Get away from center stage!" Caleb shouted, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Now!" Vivian froze. Years of control kept her rooted to the spot, confusion and authority warring on her face. The light above her groaned, metal straining. Caleb didn't have time to explain. He launched himself onto the stage, grabbed Vivian around the waist, and threw both of them sideways with every ounce of strength he possessed. They hit the stage floor hard, Caleb twisting to take the impact on his shoulder. Half a second later, 40 pounds of metal and glass crashed into the exact spot where Vivian had been standing, the mounting bracket finally giving way, the light exploding on impact with a sound like a gunshot. Shattered glass sprayed across the stage. Sparks flew from severed electrical connections. The crowd erupted in chaos, screaming, people running, security converging from all directions. But Caleb only registered Vivian in his arms, her body pressed against his, her heart hammering so hard he could feel it through their clothes. Her dark eyes were wide with shock, her perfect composure shattered, and she was shaking. "Are you hurt?" Caleb demanded, his hands moving over her shoulders, her arms, checking for injuries. "Did the glass hit you?" "I'm fine," Vivian breathed, but her voice trembled. How did you know?" "I'll explain later. Right now we need to—" Security surrounded them, pulling them apart, voices shouting questions and orders. Caleb caught a glimpse of figures fleeing from the catwalk access, saw guards racing after them. Amanda was there suddenly, her professional mask cracked with genuine terror, helping Vivian to her feet. "I'm fine," Vivian said again, louder now, authority returning to her voice even as her hands shook. Everyone calmed down. Clear the auditorium in an orderly fashion. "Amanda, get security to—" "On it," Amanda said, already coordinating on her phone. Vivian's eyes found Caleb again. He was still on the stage floor, his shoulder screaming where he'd absorbed their combined impact, glass scattered around him like diamonds. Blood ran from a cut on his arm where a shard had caught him. "You're bleeding," Vivian said. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She moved toward him, but Amanda intercepted her gently. "We need to get you to a secure location until security sweeps the building. Please, Vivian." For a moment, Caleb thought Vivian would refuse, but she let Amanda guide her toward the exit, looking back at him one last time with an expression he couldn't read. Shock, gratitude, something deeper that made his breath catch. Then she was gone, and Caleb was surrounded by security personnel asking questions he barely heard, his mind replaying those seconds on a loop. The weight of Vivian in his arms, the terror in her eyes, the absolute certainty that if he'd been 1 second slower, she would have died. And somewhere in the chaos, Caleb realized that invisible was no longer an option. He'd thrown himself into the spotlight to save her, and nothing between them would ever be the same. The security office on the second floor became command central within minutes of the auditorium evacuation. Caleb sat in a hard plastic chair while a paramedic cleaned the gash on his forearm, the sting of antiseptic barely registering against the adrenaline still flooding his system. Around him, guards spoke in clipped tones into radios, coordinating a building-wide lockdown while reviewing security footage on a wall of monitors. "You're lucky," the paramedic said, applying butterfly bandages. "Another inch, and this would have needed stitches." Caleb didn't feel lucky. He felt like his entire body was vibrating at a frequency just below visible, his mind replaying those seconds on the stage over and over. The groan of metal, Vivian's body against his, the explosion of glass where she'd been standing. "Mr. Mercer." The head of security, a former police detective named Marcus Webb, pulled up a chair. His expression was grave. "Walk me through what happened. Start with why you were checking the auditorium in the first place." Caleb explained about the morning briefing, his decision to personally verify the systems, finding the frayed safety cable and loose mounting bolts. He showed Webb the photos on his tablet, time-stamped from hours before the presentation. "You fixed it," Webb said, studying the images. "Secured everything properly, so how did the light still fall?" "Someone was up in the catwalk during the presentation," Caleb said. "I saw movement, saw them working on something. They must have loosened it again or found another way to compromise the mount." Webb's jaw tightened. "Did you see a face? Any identifying features?" "No, just a silhouette, dark clothes, moving fast." "And you didn't report the initial sabotage?" The question carried weight. Caleb met Webb's eyes steadily. "I considered it, but I had no proof it was deliberate. Could have been negligence, poor maintenance. I documented everything, fixed the immediate danger, and planned to monitor it. I didn't expect someone to actively interfere during the event itself." Webb studied him for a long moment. "Your quick thinking saved Ms. Voss's life. I want to be clear about that. But this situation is now a criminal investigation. Attempted murder, possibly corporate espionage. You'll need to make a formal statement." "Whatever you need," Caleb said. The door opened and Amanda appeared, her usual composure restored but strain visible around her eyes. "Mr. Mercer, Ms. Voss wants to see you, now." Webb nodded. "We'll continue this shortly. Don't leave the building." Caleb followed Amanda through corridors now patrolled by additional security, past employees gathered in worried clusters to the executive floor. The atmosphere up here was tense, assistants speaking in hushed voices, senior executives behind closed doors. Amanda led him not to Vivian's office, but to a smaller conference room he'd never entered before. Vivian stood at the window, her back to the door, still in the blue suit but with her hair down now, falling in waves across her shoulders. She didn't turn when they entered. "Leave us," she said quietly. Amanda hesitated. "Vivian, security protocols suggest—" "I'm safe with Caleb." Vivian's voice was soft but absolute. "Leave us, Amanda." The door closed with a click that seemed too loud in the silence. Caleb stood just inside the room, unsure whether to speak or wait, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cut on his arm throbbed in time with his pulse. "You tackled me," Vivian said finally, still facing the window. "In front of 300 people, you grabbed me and threw us both to the ground." "I'm sorry," Caleb said automatically. "I didn't have time to—" "Don't apologize." She turned, and the expression on her face stopped his words. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her carefully maintained mask completely gone. "You saved my life. Do you understand that? If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't seen that light shifting, I would be dead right now." The rawness in her voice hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't the Ice Queen, wasn't the CEO who commanded boardrooms and dismantled competitors. This was a woman confronting her own mortality, stripped of every defense. "I saw the sabotage this afternoon," Caleb said, needing to fill the silence with something concrete. "The frayed cable, the loose bolts. I fixed it, but I should have reported it immediately. Should have insisted they cancel the presentation until— You did exactly what you should have done." Vivian crossed the room, stopping 3 feet from him, close enough that he could see she was still trembling. "You identified a threat, neutralized it, and stayed vigilant. When the danger evolved, you acted without hesitation. That's not something to apologize for." "I'm just a maintenance tech," Caleb said. "I fix broken things." "I'm not—" "You're the man who saved my life twice now." Vivian's eyes held his with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Once from embarrassment and career damage when you could have exploited what you saw in my office, and today from actual death. So don't tell me what you are or aren't, Caleb Mercer. I know exactly what you are. The way she said his name rewired something fundamental in his chest. Caleb found himself taking a step closer, drawn by gravity he didn't understand. What happened up there? He said quietly. On the stage. That wasn't about maintaining your image or protecting the company. That was about you, just you. And I would do it again without thinking twice. Vivian's breath caught. For a moment, Caleb thought she might say something that would change everything between them. But then her phone buzzed, shattering the moment, and she looked away. Security found evidence in the catwalk, she said, her voice steadier now, rebuilding her composure piece by piece. Tools, cut cables. They're reviewing all footage from the building. Whoever did this will be caught. Do you know why someone would target you like this? A bitter smile crossed Vivian's face. I'm a young woman running a multi-billion-dollar company in an industry dominated by men who think they deserve what I have. I've made enemies acquiring competitors, refusing partnerships, choosing merit over politics. The list of people who'd benefit from my death is longer than I'd like to admit. The casual way she said it, people who'd benefit from my death, made Caleb's hands curl into fists. That's not normal. That's not acceptable. It's reality. Vivian moved back to the window, putting distance between them. And now I have to decide how to handle it. Cancel the product launch, increase security, show weakness to everyone watching for me to fail? You show strength by staying alive, Caleb said. Everything else is secondary. She looked at him with something that might have been wonder. You really believe that? I know what it's like to have someone depending on you, to know that your choices, your survival, determines their entire world. Caleb thought of Rosie, probably finishing her homework right now at Mrs. Chen's apartment, unaware of how close she'd come to losing him today. You have thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on this company. You owe it to them to protect yourself. Is that the only reason? Vivian asked softly. The employees. The question hung between them, heavy with implications Caleb wasn't ready to examine. Before he could answer, the door opened and Webb appeared with two other security personnel. Ms. Voss, we have a situation, Webb said grimly. We've identified the individual in the catwalk. Vivian's spine straightened, authority flooding back into her posture. Show me. They moved to a larger conference room where security had set up a command center. On the main screen, frozen footage showed a man in dark maintenance coveralls accessing the catwalk 20 minutes before the presentation. The image quality was good enough to see his face clearly. His name is David Reeves, Webb said. He's been with building maintenance for 8 months. Background check was clean, references verified. But we just discovered his employment application used a false social security number. Someone planted him, Vivian said, her voice tight. That's our assessment. We're searching his locker and contacting authorities now. But there's more. Webb pulled up another image, a screenshot of an email from an anonymous account. This was sent to 3 business journalists 40 minutes ago, before the incident. It claims you've been cooking the books, inflating revenue numbers to boost stock prices. The timing suggests whoever sent it expected you to be in no position to defend yourself. Caleb felt sick. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was coordinated destruction. Kill Vivian, release damaging accusations, tank the company's value all at once. The allegations are false, Vivian said flatly. Our books are audited quarterly by independent firms. But proving that will take time, and the accusation alone will damage investor confidence. Not if you're standing in front of cameras tomorrow, very much alive, with security footage showing an attempted murder that coincides with fraudulent allegations, Webb said. That's not whistleblowing. That's a conspiracy. We need to find Reeves before he disappears, Vivian said, and I want to know who hired him. Someone with resources, someone who understands this company well enough to coordinate this kind of attack. We're on it, Webb assured her. In the meantime, I'm assigning personal security. You don't go anywhere without... No! Vivian's voice cut like steel. I'm not hiding behind bodyguards like I'm afraid. We handle this intelligently, but I won't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me cower. Webb looked like he wanted to argue, but knew better. At minimum, you need someone watching your immediate environment. Someone you trust. Vivian's eyes found Caleb across the room. Something passed between them, a silent conversation that excluded everyone else. "Caleb stays close," she said. "He's already proven he can identify threats I can't see. He works on the executive floor anyway. Nothing changes visibly, but he's there." "Ms. Voss, with respect, Mr. Mercer is maintenance staff, not security personnel," Webb said carefully. "Mr. Mercer saved my life twice while your security personnel were watching cameras and patrolling hallways," Vivian replied, her tone brooking no argument. "I trust his instincts. He stays." Webb nodded reluctantly. "We'll need to brief him on protocols, provide communication equipment." "Fine. Do it now. I want this handled tonight." Vivian turned to Caleb, her expression unreadable. "Unless you have objections to expanding your responsibilities?" Caleb thought about what he was being asked, thought about Rosie, about the risk of putting himself between Vivian and whoever wanted her dead, thought about walking away, choosing safety, protecting the fragile stability they'd finally achieved. But when he looked at Vivian, really looked at her, he saw the vulnerability she was hiding behind steel and authority. Saw someone who'd built walls so high she couldn't see over them anymore, who trusted so few people that asking him to stay close was an act of profound faith. "No objections," Caleb said. "Whatever you need." The relief that flashed across Vivian's face was so brief he almost missed it. But it had been there, real and raw, before she locked it away again. The next 3 hours were a blur of security briefings, equipment distribution, and coordination with law enforcement. Caleb was fitted with a discreet earpiece that connected him to the security network, shown emergency protocols, and given access codes for systems he'd never imagined needing. Webb ran him through threat assessment basics, what to watch for, how to respond. "Your job isn't to engage threats," Webb emphasized. "It's to get Ms. Voss to safety and alert us. You see something suspicious? You call it in. Understand?" "Understood," Caleb agreed, though privately he wondered what he'd actually do if someone threatened Vivian in his presence. The tackle on stage had been pure instinct, and he suspected his instincts wouldn't wait for security protocols. It was nearly 11 p.m. when he finally made it home. Mrs. Chen had put Rosie to bed hours ago, leaving a note about the math homework Rosie had struggled with and the chicken soup she'd left in the fridge. Caleb stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep, and felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. He'd crossed so many lines today. Professional boundaries, class divisions, the careful distance he'd maintained between himself and the world Vivian inhabited. And tomorrow, he'd cross more, standing close to her not as invisible maintenance staff, but as something else entirely. His phone buzzed. A message from Vivian's private number, sent to his personal cell. "Thank you for today. For everything. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be complicated." Caleb stared at those words until his eyes blurred. She had his personal number, had reached out after hours, had thanked him like a person rather than an employee. The intimacy of it terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He typed back carefully. "You're welcome. See you at 7. Her response came immediately. 6:30. We have work to do before the day starts." Caleb smiled despite everything. Of course she did. The next morning arrived with news that David Reeves had been apprehended trying to board a flight to Mexico. His apartment had yielded a burner phone with messages coordinating the attack, along with $50,000 in cash. He was in custody, not talking, but law enforcement was confident they could trace the money. Caleb arrived at the executive floor at 6:15 to find it already buzzing with activity. Amanda intercepted him immediately. "Ms. Voss is in her office. She asked for you directly." Amanda's expression was complex, mixing professional courtesy with something that might have been concern. "Whatever's happening between you two, be careful. She's under enormous pressure right now, and she makes decisions based on control and strategy. Don't mistake proximity for something it isn't." The warning was clear and probably wise. Caleb nodded his understanding and knocked on Vivian's office door. "Come in." She sat behind her desk, already dressed for battle in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back severely. But her eyes were softer when she looked at him, carrying memories of yesterday's vulnerability. "How's your arm?" she asked. "Fine. Barely feel it." Caleb closed the door behind him. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." Vivian gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I spent the night reviewing everyone who might have orchestrated this." Business rivals, disgruntled former employees, board members who opposed my leadership. The list is extensive and depressing. Webb will find the connection, Caleb said, sitting. The money trail always leads somewhere. That's not what worries me. Vivian leaned back, studying him. What worries me is that I've built my entire life around not needing anyone. Control, independence, self-reliance. And yesterday, I needed you. Absolutely, completely needed you to save my life. That's not a position I'm comfortable occupying. The honesty stunned him. Caleb chose his next words carefully. Needing someone in a crisis doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. I'm not sure I'm allowed to be human, Vivian said quietly. Not in this position. Weakness is blood in the water. Every competitor, every skeptical board member, every journalist looking for a story, they're all waiting for me to prove I don't belong here. So prove them wrong, Caleb said. Show up today stronger than yesterday. Face the cameras, address the allegations, demonstrate that whoever tried to kill you failed spectacularly. That's not weakness, that's power. Vivian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You make it sound simple. I didn't say it was simple. I said it was necessary. Caleb leaned forward, holding her gaze. You asked me yesterday what you are to me. You want the truth? You're the person who changed my daughter's life by giving me a chance I didn't deserve. You're the woman who works 18-hour days to protect thousands of employees she'll never meet. And you're someone who shouldn't have to face death threats and character assassination alone. The silence that followed felt alive, charged with everything they weren't saying. Vivian's eyes searched his face like she was looking for proof he meant it, that this wasn't performance or manipulation. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. How to let someone be close without wondering what they want from me. I don't want anything except for you to be safe, Caleb said simply. That's it. That's all of it. That might be the most valuable thing anyone's ever offered me, Vivian said softly. Then, visibly gathering herself, she straightened and pulled up a schedule on her tablet. Today's agenda is brutal. Press conference at 9 addressing yesterday's incident and the false allegations. Board meeting at 11 where I'll need to reassure everyone the company is stable. Investor calls this afternoon. I need you close for all of it. I'll be there, Caleb promised. The press conference was held in the main lobby, cameras and journalists packed into every available space. Caleb stood off to the side, watching Vivian command the room with absolute authority. She addressed the assassination attempt directly, framed it as corporate sabotage coordinated with false financial allegations, and presented security footage that made the conspiracy impossible to deny. Someone wanted to destroy this company by destroying me, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the lobby. They failed. Voss Industries stands stronger today than yesterday, and we will not be intimidated by criminals and cowards. The journalists erupted with questions. Vivian fielded them with sharp intelligence, never defensive, always in control. And twice during the conference, her eyes found Caleb in the crowd, drawing strength from his presence. When it ended, Amanda intercepted them before they could return to the executive floor. The board wants to meet immediately. Richard Keller is insisting on a vote of confidence. Vivian's expression hardened. Of course he is. Let's not keep them waiting. The boardroom was on the 62nd floor, all glass walls and panoramic city views designed to remind everyone inside that they operated at the pinnacle of power. 12 board members sat around a massive table, and their expressions ranged from supportive to hostile. Richard Keller occupied the chair directly opposite the head of the table where Vivian would sit. His silver hair and expensive suit projected authority, and his eyes gleamed with something that looked like satisfaction. "Vivian," he said as she entered, "glad you could join us. We've been discussing yesterday's unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate is an interesting word for attempted murder, Richard," Vivian said coolly, taking her seat. Caleb positioned himself near the door, unobtrusive but present. "Quite right," Richard agreed, "which is why we need to discuss your security protocols, your decision-making process, and whether the company's interests are best served by maintaining current leadership during this crisis." So there it was. Not concern for Vivian's safety, but an opportunity to challenge her position. Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. "My security protocols are being enhanced," Vivian said calmly. "The individual responsible is in custody. Law enforcement is tracking the conspiracy's origins, and the false financial allegations have been thoroughly debunked by our auditors. What exactly is your concern, Richard? My concern is that someone wanted you dead badly enough to plant an operative in this building for 8 months. That suggests enemies powerful enough to threaten this company's stability. Perhaps it's time to consider whether your leadership style has created untenable risks. My leadership style doubled our value in 2 years, Vivian said, her voice sharp as broken glass. What you're actually suggesting is that I made you all significantly wealthier, and now you're wondering if someone more pliable might be easier to control. That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. Vivian leaned forward, her eyes locked on Richard. You've opposed every major decision I've made. The Techline acquisition you said would bankrupt us generated $30 million in revenue last quarter. The restructuring you called reckless improved operational efficiency by 18%. You don't question my competence, Richard. You question my right to have it. The room fell silent. Other board members shifted uncomfortably, some nodding slightly, others maintaining careful neutrality. I move that we table this discussion, said Margaret Chen, one of the older board members. Vivian has handled this crisis with exactly the leadership we hired her to provide. The threats against her are proof of her effectiveness, not evidence of failure. Seconded, added James Morrison, a venture capitalist who'd backed Vivian's early initiatives. Richard's jaw tightened. Fine, but I want regular updates on the investigation, and I want enhanced security measures that don't rely on— His eyes flicked dismissively toward Caleb. Maintenance staff playing hero. Noted, Vivian said coldly. Anything else? The meeting continued for another hour, reviewing financial projections and operational updates, but the tension never fully dissipated. Caleb watched Richard throughout, noting how the older man's eyes kept returning to Vivian with something that went beyond professional rivalry. This was personal and dangerous. When they finally escaped back to the executive floor, Vivian's composure cracked the moment her office door closed. She leaned against her desk, exhaling slowly, the weight of maintaining perfection visibly crushing down on her shoulders. He's going to keep pushing, she said quietly. Every crisis, every setback, he'll use it to question my leadership. Then don't give him setbacks, Caleb said. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Succeed so loudly, he can't make himself heard. Vivian looked up at him, and something in her expression shifted. How do you do that? Do what? Make it sound possible. Make me believe I can actually survive this. Caleb crossed the office slowly, aware he was entering territory they'd both avoided. Because I've watched you for weeks now. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care about getting things right. You're not just competent, Vivian. You're extraordinary. And anyone who can't see that is deliberately closing their eyes. Caleb— Her voice caught on his name. Someone tried to kill you yesterday, he continued, his voice low and intense. And today you stood in front of cameras and the board and everyone watching for you to break, and you didn't. You're still standing, still fighting. That's not something that needs my belief to make it real. It already is. Vivian stood there, 3 feet away from him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. Vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the space between them that kept shrinking. You scare me, she whispered. I scare you? You see me. Vivian's eyes held his, dark and deep and full of things she clearly wasn't ready to name. Not the CEO, not the Ice Queen, not the legacy or the empire, just me. And I don't know what to do with that. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. You don't have to do anything with it. I'm not asking for anything, Vivian. I'm here. That's all. That's not all, she said. That's everything. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them could afford to pursue. Caleb knew they were standing on the edge of something that would change everything, destroy every professional boundary, compromise every carefully maintained distance. But before either of them could move forward or back, the door burst open and Amanda rushed in, her face pale. We have a problem, she said. The investigators found something in Reeves's phone records. The person who hired him? It's someone inside the company. The words hit like a physical blow. Vivian's face went white, then flushed with rage so pure it seemed to heat the air around her. Who? She said, her voice deadly quiet. Amanda hesitated, her eyes flicking to Caleb before settling back on Vivian. The investigators want to brief you directly. They're on their way up now with Detective Morrison from the police department. But Vivian, they said the evidence is conclusive. I don't care about conclusive, Vivian said, moving around her desk with controlled fury. I want a name. They wouldn't give it to me over the phone. Said it was too sensitive. Amanda's hands twisted together, a rare show of anxiety. But they mentioned it goes high. Someone with access to executive systems and confidential information. Caleb felt ice spread through his chest. High level meant board members, senior executives, people who'd been with the company for years. People Vivian had trusted, worked alongside, perhaps even considered allies in the constant battle to prove herself worthy of her father's legacy. Clear my schedule for the next 2 hours, Vivian said. I want Webb, the investigators, and Detective Morrison in the main conference room. No one else. And Amanda, I need you to pull personnel files for everyone at director level and above. Access logs for the last year, financial records, anything that might show connections to Reeves or unusual activity. On it. Amanda disappeared, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. Vivian stood motionless for a moment, her back to Caleb, her shoulders rigid with tension. When she finally turned, her expression was pure steel. All traces of the vulnerability from moments before locked away behind walls he suspected were even thicker now. This doesn't leave this room, she said. Not even to security staff you might trust. Until we know who we're dealing with, everyone is suspect. Understood, Caleb said quietly. But Vivian, you need to consider that whoever this is, they're desperate enough to kill you. If they suspect they've been discovered, they'll do what? Try again? Vivian's laugh was bitter. Let them try. I'm not hiding, and I'm not running, not from corporate sabotage, and certainly not from traitors in my own company. I'm not suggesting you hide. I'm suggesting you be smart about this. Caleb moved closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. Someone inside had access to your schedule, knew exactly where you'd be standing on that stage, had months to plan this. They're not going to confess and walk away quietly. Which is why we're going to be very careful about how we handle the reveal. Vivian's eyes held his, and he saw the strategist beneath the rage. Once we have the name, we control the information. Use it to set a trap, gather evidence that's airtight. Make sure when we move against them there's no possibility of escape or legal maneuvering. You've done this before, Caleb realized. Not murder conspiracies, but corporate warfare? Yes. Vivian moved to the window, looking out over the city she'd claimed as her territory. You don't get to where I am without learning how to identify enemies and neutralize them. I just never expected the enemy to be this close. The pain in her voice was carefully controlled but audible. Caleb understood then that this betrayal cut deeper than professional rivalry or business competition. Vivian had built her life around not trusting people, and now someone had proven every cynical instinct right. Not everyone is your enemy, he said quietly. She looked at him, something flickering in her eyes. No? I'm not. The words hung between them, simple and absolute. Vivian studied his face like she was searching for cracks in the foundation, testing the weight his promise could bear. I know, she said finally, so softly he almost missed it. The intercom on her desk buzzed. Ms. Voss, Detective Morrison and the investigative team are here, Jennifer's voice announced. Send them to conference room A, Vivian said, her voice instantly professional again. We'll be there in 2 minutes. She straightened her suit jacket, smoothed her hair, rebuilt her armor piece by piece until the vulnerable woman who'd confessed that Caleb saw her was completely hidden. But just before she headed for the door, she paused and looked back at him. Stay close, she said. She stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. I need to know you're there. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb promised. Conference room A was the largest on the executive floor, designed for board meetings and high-stakes negotiations. Detective Morrison was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many crimes to be shocked by much. She stood beside Marcus Webb and 2 other investigators Caleb didn't recognize, all of them looking grim. Ms. Voss, Morrison said as they entered, thank you for meeting on short notice. I understand this is difficult. but the evidence we've uncovered requires immediate action. Show me, Vivian said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Caleb positioned himself near the wall, close enough to intervene if necessary, but outside the direct circle of conversation. Morrison pulled up images on the main screen, phone records, financial transactions, email metadata. David Reeves received his instructions through an encrypted messaging app, but we were able to trace the account through payment records. The person who hired him made 3 transfers totaling $50,000 over the past 6 months. The money came from an offshore account, but the setup was sloppy. They thought they'd hidden their tracks, but forensic accounting found the source. Who? Vivian said again, her voice flat. Morrison glanced at Webb, then back to Vivian. The account was funded by liquidating stock options belonging to Eric Zhao, your chief technology officer. The name landed like a grenade. Caleb saw Vivian's expression freeze, shock warring with disbelief. Eric Zhao had been with Voss Industries for 8 years, had worked directly with Harrison Voss, and was responsible for the technological innovations that had made the company's recent expansion possible. That's not possible, Vivian said slowly. He's been loyal to this company since before I took over. He supported every initiative, worked 18-hour days on the new product line. Why would he? We believe he's working with outside interests. Morrison interrupted. The financial trail shows he's in debt, significant gambling losses over the past 2 years. Someone approached him, offered to clear his debts in exchange for cooperation. The plan was to eliminate you, install more pliable leadership, and Eric would maintain his position while feeding information to competitors. Vivian sat back, her face pale. Eric came to my father's funeral, told me he believed in my vision for the company, has sat in meetings with me almost daily for 2 years, and all that time he was planning to kill you, Webb finished grimly. We've been watching him since we identified the connection an hour ago. He's in his office right now, acting like everything is normal. We need your authorization to arrest him. Not yet, Vivian said sharply. Morrison frowned. Ms. Voss, he's a flight risk. If he suspects we're on to him, he doesn't suspect. If he did, he'd already be gone. Vivian's mind was clearly racing, strategizing even through the shock. Eric is smart, careful. He's been planning this for months, maybe years, which means there's more we don't know, more people involved, more evidence to gather. If we arrest him now, we lose the chance to see the full picture. You want to use him, Morrison said, understanding dawning. I want to finish this, Vivian corrected. Not just stop one attack, but dismantle the entire conspiracy. Eric had help. Someone on the outside funding this, coordinating it. I want them too. Webb leaned forward. That's dangerous, Ms. Voss. Every day Eric walks free is another day he could try something else. Not if he thinks he's still hidden, Vivian said. Not if we feed him information that makes him believe his plan is still viable. Caleb watched her work, saw the strategic mind that had built an empire operating at full capacity. But he also saw the cost, the way her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together, the tension in her jaw that spoke of betrayal cutting deep. What do you propose? Morrison asked. We tell Eric that the investigation into Reeves is stalling, that the money trail went cold at the offshore account, that I'm focused on external threats and increasing public security, leaving internal systems vulnerable. Vivian's voice gained strength as the plan took shape. We give him rope to hang himself with, and we watch everything he does, everyone he contacts. That puts you at significant risk, Morrison said carefully. If he feels threatened, if he suspects at all, I'll have protection, Vivian said, her eyes flicking to Caleb. And I'll be careful, but I won't let whoever orchestrated this walk away because we moved too fast. The detective studied Vivian for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 48 hours. We'll monitor Eric around the clock, track every communication, every movement, but if he makes any move that suggests immediate danger, we shut it down. Agreed? Agreed, Vivian said. The meeting continued for another hour, establishing surveillance protocols and communication channels. Caleb listened, absorbing details while his mind spun with the implications. Eric Zhao had access to everything: building systems, Vivian's schedule, security protocols. If he'd been planning this for years, there was no telling what other traps he'd laid. When the investigators finally left, Vivian remained seated at the conference table, staring at her clasped hands. The silence stretched until Caleb couldn't stand it anymore. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "You don't have to put yourself at risk to catch everyone involved. Let the police handle it." "The police will arrest Eric and be satisfied with closing the case," Vivian said without looking up. "But the person who funded this, who approached Eric in the first place, they'll disappear. Find someone else to target me with. And I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next attack will come." "Better than being dead." "Is it?" Vivian finally looked at him, and her eyes were haunted. "I've built my entire existence around control, Caleb. Around knowing the variables, managing the risks, staying 3 steps ahead of everyone trying to take what I've built. If I let fear dictate my choices now, I lose the only thing that's kept me standing all these years." Caleb moved closer, pulling out the chair beside her instead of maintaining his careful distance. "You're allowed to be afraid. You're allowed to choose safety over vengeance." "This isn't vengeance, it's survival." Vivian's voice cracked slightly. "And maybe I'm tired of surviving alone. Maybe that's why I'm asking you to stay close. Because, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I don't want to face this by myself." The confession settled between them, vulnerable and raw. Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and covered her hand with his. Her skin was cold, trembling slightly, and when his warmth touched hers, she inhaled sharply. "You're not alone," Caleb said. "Not in this. Not anymore." Vivian turned her hand over, threading her fingers through his, and they sat there in the empty conference room holding on to each other like lifelines in a storm. The next 48 hours were the longest of Caleb's life. He stayed within 10 feet of Vivian at all times, shadowing her through meetings and video conferences, standing outside her office when she needed privacy. Eating meals he barely tasted while watching everyone who came near her with suspicion that bordered on paranoia. Eric Zhao appeared at staff meetings looking concerned and supportive, asking Vivian how she was handling the stress, offering to take on additional responsibilities. Caleb watched him perform empathy and concern, and every word felt like acid on his skin. This man had tried to kill Vivian, had betrayed everything she'd built, and now he smiled and nodded like a loyal employee while planning his next move. "How are you holding up?" Eric asked Vivian after a product development meeting, his voice warm with false concern. "I'm fine, Eric. Thank you for asking." Vivian's performance was flawless, giving nothing away. "Your work on the new interface is excellent, by the way. Exactly what we need for launch." "Just doing my job," Eric said modestly. "We all want to see you succeed." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Caleb had to fight the urge to grab Eric by his expensive collar and throw him against the nearest wall. But Vivian's hand touched his arm briefly as she passed, a silent reminder to stay calm, stay focused. Surveillance teams reported that Eric was making encrypted calls to an unknown number, always from locations outside the building where he thought he had privacy. The technical team was working to break the encryption, but it was sophisticated, suggesting whoever Eric reported to had significant resources. On the second night, around 11 p.m., Caleb was doing a final security sweep of the executive floor when his earpiece crackled to life. "We've got movement," Webb's voice said urgently. "Eric just entered the building through the parking garage. He's not supposed to be here." Caleb's heart rate spiked. "Where's Ms. Voss?" "Still in her office. We've got eyes on her, but Eric's heading for the executive floor now. Get to her." Caleb ran, his boots pounding against marble as he raced down the corridor. Behind him, he heard elevator doors opening, footsteps echoing through the empty building. He burst into Vivian's wing to find her at her desk, paperwork spread around her, completely unaware of the danger approaching. "We need to go," Caleb said urgently. "Now!" Vivian looked up, instantly reading the tension in his voice. "Eric?" "In the building. Coming up. Webb's mobilizing security, but..." The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the executive floor, emergency lighting failing to activate. Caleb heard Vivian's sharp intake of breath, heard movement in the hallway outside, and every instinct screamed danger. "Stay behind me," he whispered, pulling Vivian away from the desk. His eyes were adjusting to the darkness, shapes emerging from shadow. He could see the outline of her office door, the windows showing city lights beyond. "He's cutting power," Vivian breathed against his shoulder. "Disabling security systems." "Where's your panic button?" "Desk drawer. But if the power's out..." Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, someone who knew exactly where they were going. Caleb positioned himself between Vivian and the door, his hands empty but his mind racing through options. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't trained for this, but he'd meant what he said about protecting her. "Vivian?" Eric's voice called from the darkness, friendly and calm. "Are you still here?" "The power went out. I came to make sure you were okay." The performance was chilling in its normalcy. Caleb felt Vivian tense against his back, heard her breathing quicken. "I'm fine, Eric," she called back, her voice steady despite everything. "Just finishing some work. The emergency lighting should kick in any moment." "Actually, it won't." Eric appeared in the doorway, backlit by emergency exits in the hallway beyond. Caleb couldn't see his face clearly, but he could see the gun in Eric's hand, dark and deadly. "I made sure of that. Had months to prepare, to understand every system in this building. You made it easy, really, trusting me with so much access." "Eric, what are you doing?" Vivian's voice carried just the right note of confusion, still playing her part even with a gun pointed at her. "What I should have done 2 years ago when they first approached me," Eric said, stepping into the office. "You were never supposed to run this company, Vivian. Your father knew it, the board knew it. Everyone knew except you. So stubborn, so convinced you could prove everyone wrong. And you did, which made everything so much more complicated." "Who approached you?" Vivian asked, and Caleb heard the calculation in her voice. "Keep him talking. Buy time for security to arrive." "People who understand that innovation shouldn't be controlled by legacy and name recognition. People who could actually use Voss Industries technology to change the world, instead of protecting market share and shareholder profits." Eric moved closer, and Caleb shifted to maintain his position between them. "They offered me a real future. Chief Technology Officer of a combined entity that would dominate the industry. All I had to do was remove the obstacle." "You mean kill me?" Vivian said flatly. "Remove," Eric repeated. "The stage light was supposed to be clean. Tragic accident, company in mourning, smooth transition to new leadership. But you had to have him." The gun gestured toward Caleb, playing maintenance hero, ruined everything. "So now we do this the hard way." "Security is already coming," Caleb said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Building's on lockdown. You won't make it out." "I don't need to make it out," Eric said. "I just need her dead. They'll extract me after, new identity, new life, but only if I finish the job." The gun rose, pointing directly at Vivian, and Caleb saw Eric's finger tighten on the trigger. He didn't think, didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. He lunged sideways, slamming into Eric with all his weight, driving them both into the wall beside the door. The gun discharged, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash illuminating the office in stark white light. Caleb felt the bullet pass so close to his head the air pressure made his ear ring, but he was already moving, grabbing for Eric's wrist, trying to control the weapon. They crashed into furniture, struggling in near darkness, and Caleb realized with cold clarity that Eric was stronger than he looked, desperate enough to fight with everything he had. "Run!" Caleb shouted at Vivian, not sure if she could hear him over the sound of his own pulse hammering. "Get out!" But Vivian didn't run. He caught a glimpse of her moving in his peripheral vision, heard the crash of something heavy, her desk lamp, connecting with Eric's skull. The CTO staggered, his grip on the gun loosening, and Caleb wrenched it away, sending it skittering across the floor into darkness. Eric recovered faster than Caleb expected, driving an elbow into his ribs that forced the air from his lungs. They went down together, hitting the floor hard, and Caleb felt hands close around his throat, squeezing with methodical pressure. "Should have stayed invisible," Eric hissed, his face inches away. "Should have just fixed the lights and disappeared. But you had to play hero, had to make yourself important to her. Now you die with her." Caleb's vision started to gray at the edges, his lungs screaming for air. He clawed at Eric's hands, trying to break the grip, but his strength was fading fast. Through the gathering darkness, he saw Vivian searching frantically for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Then light flooded the office, blinding after so much darkness, and voices shouted from multiple directions. The pressure on Caleb's throat released abruptly as security guards swarmed the room, pulling Eric away, forcing him to the ground. Caleb gasped for air, his throat raw, his vision clearing slowly. Strong hands helped him sit up, and suddenly Vivian was there kneeling beside him, her hands framing his face with desperate gentleness. "Caleb," she said, her voice breaking on his name. "Can you hear me? Are you hurt?" He tried to speak, coughed instead, his throat burning. Vivian's eyes were wide with fear he'd never seen there before, tears tracking down her cheeks, and he realized she was shaking. "I'm okay," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you? Did he?" "I'm fine. You kept yourself between us." Her thumb brushed his cheek, and only then did Caleb realize he was bleeding from somewhere. "You threw yourself at a gun. You impossible, brave, stupid man. You could have died." "Couldn't let him hurt you," Caleb said simply. Around them, security was securing Eric, reading him his rights, coordinating with the police teams flooding into the building. Detective Morrison appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. "We got it all on audio," she said grimly. "His confession, the mention of extraction, and new identity. That plus the attempted murder will put him away for life. And we're already working on identifying his contacts based on the phone records we cracked an hour ago." "Good," Vivian said, but her attention never left Caleb. "Get him out of here. Get all of them out." Webb started to protest. "Ms. Voss, we need statements, medical evaluation." "Later," Vivian said, her voice carrying absolute authority despite the tears still wet on her face. "Everyone out, now." They went, though Webb looked reluctant. Eric was dragged away, shouting threats and justifications that faded as they hauled him toward the elevators. Then the door closed, and Caleb and Vivian were alone in her office, surrounded by overturned furniture and the evidence of violence, both of them breathing hard. "You saved my life," Vivian said quietly. "Again." "That's becoming a habit," Caleb tried to joke, but his voice was too rough, too raw. "Don't." Vivian's yet were still on his face, holding him like she was afraid he'd disappear. "Don't make light of this. You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me, Caleb. You could have died." "But I didn't," he said. "We didn't. We're both still here." "Because of you." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "Because you keep choosing to stand between me and people trying to destroy me. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to—" She stopped, her voice breaking completely, and Caleb saw the moment when every wall she'd built came crashing down. The Ice Queen dissolved, leaving only Vivian Voss, terrified, grateful, completely undone by the weight of everything they'd survived together. "I see you too," she whispered. "I see you, Caleb Mercer. And I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between you walking in on me half-dressed and you tackling a man with a gun, I stopped being able to imagine facing any of this without you." Caleb's breath caught. They were still on the floor of her office, both of them bruised and bleeding, surrounded by chaos. And she was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had tried to kill her twice. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, echoing his promise from days that felt like lifetimes ago. "Not now, not ever, if you'll let me stay." "I don't deserve you," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "That's not your choice to make," Caleb said gently. "I'm already here, already yours, if you want me." The silence that followed felt endless, heavy with possibility and fear, and the bridge they were both standing on, deciding whether to cross or retreat to safer ground. Then Vivian leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't gentle or uncertain. It was desperate and fierce, tasting of salt from her tears and copper from his split lip. And Caleb kissed her back with everything he had. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she came willingly, pressing against him like she needed the contact to believe he was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "This is complicated," she whispered. "I know," Caleb said. "People will talk. The board, the employees, everyone will have opinions about the CEO and the maintenance tech. I know that too. And I'm still figuring out how to be human instead of just a position and a legacy." "I've got time," Caleb said. "As much as you need." Vivian pulled back just enough to look at him, searching his face for doubt or hesitation. Whatever she saw there made her eyes fill with tears again, but this time she was smiling. "You really mean that," she said, wonder in her voice. Every word, Caleb promised. You and me against the corporate assassins. We make a pretty good team. Vivian laughed, the sound watery but genuine, and kissed him again. Softer this time, slower, like they had all the time in the world instead of security teams waiting outside and statements to give and an empire that still needed protecting. But for this moment, in the darkness of her office with emergency lights finally flickering to life, they were just two people who'd survived impossible odds and found something neither of them had been looking for. Each other. The paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, insisting on checking both of them despite Vivian's protests that she was fine. Caleb sat still while they examined the bruising around his throat, cleaned the cut on his cheekbone, and asked questions about dizziness and vision that he answered automatically while his mind was still caught on the feeling of Vivian's lips against his. She stood nearby, refusing to leave even when the paramedic suggested she should sit down, her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding something precious and fragile. Their eyes kept meeting across the small space, conversations happening in silence that neither of them was ready to voice aloud. "You're lucky," the paramedic said, shining a light in Caleb's eyes. "Another few seconds of pressure, and we'd be talking about serious damage. As it is, your throat's going to be sore for a week, and those bruises will look worse before they look better." "I'll survive," Caleb said, his voice still rough. "That seems to be your specialty," Vivian said quietly, and something in her tone made the paramedic glance between them with knowing eyes. Detective Morrison returned once the medical team finished, her expression grim but satisfied. "Eric Zhao is in custody and talking, not because he wants to, but because we've got him on attempted murder with multiple witnesses and audio recording. His lawyer is already trying to negotiate a deal." "What kind of deal?" Vivian asked, her voice hardening back into the CEO tone that commanded boardrooms. "Information about his co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's claiming he was coerced, that the people who approached him threatened his family if he didn't cooperate." Morrison's skepticism was evident. "We're verifying his claims, but preliminary investigation suggests he's lying. His gambling debts were real, his financial desperation was real, and the offshore accounts we've traced show payments that look a lot like incentives rather than threats." "Who was paying him?" Caleb asked. "That's where it gets interesting." Morrison pulled up something on her tablet and showed them a corporate logo Caleb didn't recognize. "Meridian Technologies. One of your competitors, Ms. Voss. Or rather, they were your competitors until you acquired them 18 months ago." Vivian's expression went cold. "The executive team from Meridian was integrated into our structure. Some of them are still here." "Exactly. We believe this was a revenge play coordinated by former Meridian leadership who lost their positions after the acquisition. They recruited Eric, funded the operation, and planned to install their own people once you were eliminated. Then they'd orchestrate a hostile takeover, reclaim what they considered theirs." "Names," Vivian said. "I want names." Morrison listed 3 executives, all of whom Caleb vaguely recognized from the morning briefings. Senior vice presidents who'd seemed cooperative and professional, who'd attended meetings and contributed to projects while secretly planning murder. "They're being arrested as we speak," Morrison said, along with several others who were involved in the financial side. "By morning, this will be the lead story on every business network. Attempted assassination, corporate conspiracy, the works." Vivian closed her eyes briefly, and Caleb saw the weight settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about managing the fallout, controlling the narrative, protecting the company and its thousands of employees from the scandal that was about to engulf them. "I need to make a statement," she said, "before the story breaks on its own terms. We control this, or it controls us." "At midnight?" Morrison asked. "The financial markets open in Asia in 3 hours. If this breaks without context, without my voice framing it, our stock price will crater and competitors will circle like sharks." Vivian was already moving, her strategic mind overriding exhaustion and trauma. "I need Amanda, the communications team, and legal. We draft a statement, release it to major outlets with an embargo until 6 a.m. Eastern, and I do a live interview at 7. "Vivian," Caleb said quietly, "you just survived a murder attempt. You're allowed to rest." She looked at him, and for a moment her mask slipped enough that he saw the bone-deep weariness underneath. "If I rest, I think about how close I came to dying, How Eric sat across from me in meetings for 2 years planning to kill me. How I trusted people who wanted me dead. Her voice wavered. I can't afford to think about that yet. So I work. Caleb understood. He'd done the same thing after Melissa left, burying himself in survival and single parenthood, because stopping meant drowning in fear and abandonment, but understanding didn't mean he had to let Vivian destroy herself. Then I'm staying with you, he said. You work? I'm there? No arguments. Something softened in Vivian's expression. You should go home. Rosie needs you. Mrs. Chen is with Rosie. What I need is to know you're safe. Caleb stood, ignoring the protest from his bruised ribs. You said yourself, you don't want to face this alone anymore. So don't. The look Vivian gave him was complex, gratitude and vulnerability, and something deeper that neither of them had time to examine right now. But she nodded, accepting his presence like a gift she didn't quite know how to receive. The next 4 hours were a blur of activity. Amanda arrived within 20 minutes, her professional composure intact despite being called in at midnight. The communications team assembled, lawyers joined via video conference, and they crafted a statement that walked the razor's edge between transparency and damage control. Caleb stayed in the background, watching Vivian command the room with the same authority she'd shown in every crisis. But now he could see the cost, the way her hands shook slightly when she thought no one was looking, the tightness around her eyes that spoke of pain she wouldn't acknowledge. Around 3 a.m., during a brief pause while the lawyers reviewed language, Vivian caught his eye and gestured toward her private office. He followed, closing the door on the controlled chaos outside. I can't do this, she said the moment they were alone, her voice breaking. Caleb moved to her immediately. Yes, you can. You've been doing it for hours. I mean, I can't do this. She gestured between them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Whatever happened on that floor earlier, whatever we said, I can't think about it right now, can't process what it means or what I want, or how to fit something personal into a life that's about to become a media circus. The words hurt, but Caleb understood them. Okay. Okay? Vivian looked at him like she'd expected an argument. You need time. Space to handle the crisis without worrying about us. Caleb kept his voice gentle despite the ache in his chest. I get it. I'm not going anywhere, Vivian. When you're ready to think about this, I'll be here. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. I care about you. That doesn't change because you need to focus on your company right now. Do what you need to do. I'll wait. Vivian's fingers tightened around his. What if waiting means weeks? Months? What if by the time I have space to breathe, you've realized that a single father with a 6-year-old daughter doesn't need the complications that come with me? Then I guess you don't know me as well as I thought, Caleb said quietly, because complications don't scare me. Losing you before we even have a chance to see what this could be? That terrifies me. She kissed him then, desperate and brief, like she was trying to memorize the feeling before duty pulled her away. When they broke apart, she was crying silently, tears tracking down her face. I need you to take care of yourself, she whispered. Go home after this. Be with Rosie. Let me handle the corporate nightmare without worrying that you're exhausting yourself trying to protect me from everything. Vivian, please. Her voice broke completely. Please, Caleb. I need to know you're safe and resting. That's how you help me right now. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist on staying, but he saw the genuine need in her eyes. She was trying to protect him the only way she knew how, by creating distance before the media storm destroyed everything in its path. Okay, he said finally. But we're not done. This conversation, we're not done. We're not done, Vivian agreed. She touched his bruised throat gently, her expression anguished. I'm sorry he hurt you. I'd take 1,000 bruises if it meant keeping you alive. She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. That's exactly the kind of thing that makes this impossible to walk away from, even temporarily. They stood there for another moment, holding each other in the quiet of her office while the world waited outside. Then duty called and they separated, rebuilding their professional distance like armor against the chaos to come. Caleb left Voss Tower at 4:30 a.m., his body aching and his mind spinning. The city was still dark, the streets empty except for delivery trucks and insomniacs. He rode the bus home in a daze, watching dawn break over Seattle's skyline, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold that seemed impossibly beautiful after the violence of the night. Mrs. Chen was asleep on his couch when he arrived, a blanket tucked around her thin shoulders. He woke her gently, thanked her profusely, and promised to tell her everything later. She looked at the bruises on his throat with worried eyes but didn't ask questions, just patted his hand and shuffled back to her own apartment. Rosie was sprawled across her narrow bed, one arm flung over her stuffed rabbit, peaceful and completely unaware that her father had nearly died. Caleb stood in her doorway and watched her breathe, letting the simple reality of her existence anchor him back to what mattered most. He'd built his entire life around keeping this little girl safe and loved, and somehow, impossibly, he'd found room in that life for Vivian Voss, a woman who needed protection and connection just as desperately as Rosie did, even if she'd spent years pretending otherwise. Caleb showered carefully, avoiding the bruises, and fell into bed as sunlight streamed through his window. He slept fitfully, dreams full of falling lights and gunshots, and Vivian's voice saying his name like a prayer. He woke to Rosie bouncing on his bed at 8 a.m., her dark hair wild around her face. "Daddy, you're home! Mrs. Chen said you had to work really late." She stopped bouncing, her eyes going wide. "What happened to your face?" Caleb sat up carefully, every muscle protesting. "I had an accident at work. But I'm okay, sweet girl. Just a little banged up." "Did you fall?" Rosie touched his cheek with gentle fingers, her expression so serious it made his heart ache. "Something like that." He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "But I'm fine now, and I'm home, which is what matters." They made breakfast together, slightly burnt pancakes and orange juice, while morning cartoons played in the background. Caleb's phone buzzed constantly with messages he ignored, letting the world outside wait while he focused on this small, perfect moment of normalcy. But eventually, reality intruded. Around 10 a.m., his phone rang with a number he recognized as Amanda's direct line. "Mr. Mercer, I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Voss," Amanda said without preamble. "She wanted you to know that her statement has been released and the interview went well. The board is meeting this afternoon to address the situation formally." "How is she?" Caleb asked. A pause. "Functioning, which is about all any of us can say right now." Amanda's voice softened slightly. "She asked me to tell you specifically that security has been enhanced across all facilities, that Eric and his co-conspirators are in custody, and that you should take the next few days off to recover." "I don't need—" "It's not a request, Mr. Mercer. It's a direct order from Ms. Voss. She's quite insistent." Another pause. "Between you and me? She needs to know you're safe and resting. It's the only thing keeping her focused right now." Caleb closed his eyes, understanding the subtext. Vivian was using his safety as a focal point to get through the crisis, something concrete to hold on to when everything else was chaos. "Tell her I'm taking care of myself," he said quietly, "and that I'll be here when she needs me." "I will," Amanda said. "And Mr. Mercer, thank you for everything you've done for her." The call ended, leaving Caleb staring at his phone while Rosie watched cartoons, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the adult world. The next 3 days were surreal. The story dominated every news cycle. Attempted assassination, corporate conspiracy, the brilliant young CEO who'd survived multiple attempts on her life. Vivian's face was everywhere, giving interviews, addressing shareholders, projecting strength and control, while the company's stock price actually rose on the narrative of her resilience. Caleb watched from home, healing slowly, fielding calls from coworkers who wanted details he wouldn't share. Marcus Webb called once to say the investigation was expanding, that the full scope of the conspiracy involved more people than they'd initially suspected, but that Vivian was safe now with enhanced security. She didn't call, didn't text. And Caleb understood that too. She was in crisis management mode, every moment scheduled and strategic, no room for personal complications. But understanding didn't stop him from checking his phone obsessively, hoping for some small sign that she was thinking about him. On the fourth day, Mrs. Chen knocked on his door with a package. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with Caleb's name written in elegant handwriting he recognized from office memos. Inside was a book, a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, and a note card. Rosie mentioned in passing that you read to her every night, but your copy of this got damaged in a move. Found this at a bookstore near my apartment and thought of you both. Thank you for understanding why I need space right now. It doesn't mean I've forgotten what you said, or what I said, or what happened between us, just that I need to build something stable before I can let myself want something personal. I hope that makes sense. I hope you'll wait a little longer. V. Caleb sat on his couch holding the book and reading the note 3 times, something warm and painful expanding in his chest. She'd remembered a throwaway comment about a children's book, had gone out of her way to replace it, was asking him to wait while she rebuilt her world. He texted back simply, "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Her response came 6 hours later, after what must have been another brutal day of meetings and media. "Thank you for being patient with me, for seeing me, even when I'm terrible at letting people close." They fell into a pattern after that. Brief texts, usually late at night after Vivian finished her 18-hour days. Nothing romantic, nothing that crossed professional lines. Just small check-ins that said, "I'm still here," and "I haven't forgotten you." Caleb returned to work after a week, cleared by medical and eager to have something to do besides watch Vivian manage a corporate crisis from a distance. The executive floor felt different now. More security, more tension, suspicious looks from employees who'd worked alongside the conspirators without knowing their intentions. But he didn't see Vivian. Her schedule was restructured to minimize predictable patterns, her movements through the building coordinated by security. He caught glimpses sometimes, her voice carrying from a conference room a flash of mahogany hair as she moved through corridors flanked by bodyguards. But they occupied different worlds again. 2 weeks after Eric's arrest, the board announced a formal investigation into the company's security protocols and integration processes for acquired companies. Richard Keller resigned citing personal reasons, though industry gossip suggested he'd been forced out for his opposition to Vivian's leadership during the crisis. 3 other board members went with him, replaced by people who actually supported her vision. The product launch that had been interrupted by the assassination attempt was rescheduled for a month later. Amanda sent Caleb a work order to personally verify every system in the auditorium 3 times before the event, which felt less like a technical requirement and more like Vivian trying to give him something important to do. He threw himself into the work with obsessive attention to detail, checking and rechecking every connection, every safety system, every possible point of failure. When the launch finally happened, it went flawlessly. Vivian commanding the stage with absolute confidence, the technology performing perfectly, 300 people witnessing her triumph over everyone who'd tried to destroy her. Caleb watched from the control booth, managing systems remotely, and felt pride so fierce it hurt. She'd survived assassination attempts, corporate conspiracy, and a hostile board, and she was still standing, still fighting, still extraordinary. When the event ended and the crowd dispersed, his earpiece crackled with a voice he hadn't heard directly in weeks. "Caleb?" Vivian said quietly. "Are you still in the building?" His heart stopped. "Yes. Control booth. Can you meet me in my office in 20 minutes? Of course. Those 20 minutes were the longest of his life. Caleb tried not to read too much into the request, tried not to hope, but his hands were shaking when he finally knocked on her office door. "Come in." Vivian stood by her window, backlit by Seattle's evening lights, still in the navy suit she'd worn for the launch. But her hair was down, falling in waves across her shoulders, and when she turned to face him, her expression was vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen since that night on the floor of her office. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," Caleb replied, staying near the door, uncertain of his welcome. "The launch went perfectly. Your work on the systems was flawless. Just doing my job." "Is that what you're doing?" Vivian crossed the room slowly, stopping 3 feet away. "Just your job? Because I've spent 3 weeks trying to convince myself that's all this is. Professional gratitude for someone who saved my life. Appreciation for an excellent employee. Nothing more complicated than that." Caleb's pulse hammered. "Did it work?" "No." She smiled sadly. Turns out I'm terrible at lying to myself when it comes to you. I tried, Caleb. I really tried to rebuild my walls and go back to the way things were before you walked into my life. But every night I'd finish whatever crisis needed managing, and I'd think about that book I bought for Rosie, about the way you held me when I was falling apart, about how you threw yourself at a man with a gun without hesitation because you couldn't stand the thought of me being hurt. Vivian, let me finish. She took a breath, steadying herself. I've spent 3 weeks watching you from a distance, seeing how you interact with other staff, how patient you are with every request, how you've never once demanded my attention or made this about your needs. And I realized something. You're not waiting for me to become someone different. You're just waiting for me to be ready. That's more than anyone's ever given me. You're worth waiting for, Caleb said quietly. I don't know if that's true, Vivian admitted. I'm still figuring out how to be a person instead of just a position. Still learning how to trust people's intentions. Still terrified that if I let myself want this, want you, something will destroy it. Something might, Caleb acknowledged. That's the risk of letting people close. But I think the alternative, spending your life alone to avoid the possibility of getting hurt, that's worse. Vivian laughed, the sound watery. When did a maintenance technician get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a single dad who knows what it's like to build walls because trust is too expensive. Caleb moved closer, closing the distance between them. But somewhere along the way, you made me want to tear those walls down, made me believe that maybe it was possible to have more than just survival. What do you want, Caleb? Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. If I can figure out how to make space for something personal in my life, what does that look like to you? He thought about Rosie, about the fragile stability they'd finally achieved, about the risks of mixing his world with Vivian's empire, thought about every reason this was complicated and difficult and potentially disastrous. Then he thought about Vivian's vulnerability when she'd confessed that he saw her, about the way she'd cried when he'd nearly been strangled protecting her, about 3 weeks of careful distance that hadn't diminished what he felt, only clarified it. I want to take you to dinner, he said, somewhere quiet where we can talk without crisis management or corporate politics. I want to introduce you to Rosie, eventually, when we're both sure this is something real and lasting. I want to know what makes you laugh when you're not being the ice queen. And I want you to know that no matter how complicated this gets, I'm choosing you. Consciously, deliberately. Not because you're the CEO or because you changed my life with a job promotion, but because you're Vivian, and I care about you more than I've cared about anyone in longer than I can remember. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks, but she was smiling. I don't know how to date. I've spent my entire adult life focused on proving myself worthy of this company. Personal relationships were always secondary, temporary. Then we'll figure it out together, Caleb said. No expectations except honesty. We try, and if it doesn't work, at least we tried. And if it does work, Vivian asked, if the CEO falls for the maintenance tech and everyone has opinions and the board thinks I'm being unprofessional and the media decides it's a scandal, then we deal with it, Caleb said simply. Together. Vivian closed the final distance between them, her hands coming up to frame his face, careful of the bruises that were finally fading. You saved my life twice, saw through every wall I built, and somehow convinced me that maybe I deserve something more than just corporate success. You deserve everything, Caleb said fiercely. Every happiness, every moment of peace, every person who sees how extraordinary you are. She kissed him then, soft and slow, and full of promise. And when they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing and holding on to each other like they'd finally found something worth fighting for. Dinner sounds perfect, Vivian whispered against his lips. But fair warning, I have no idea how to be normal about any of this. Good thing I'm not looking for normal, Caleb said. Just real. Just you. 3 months later, Caleb stood in Vivian's apartment, a penthouse that was somehow less intimidating than he'd expected, full of books and plants and evidence of actual human habitation, and watched her help Rosie with a school project about careers. So you run the whole company? Rosie asked, her eyes wide with fascination. I do, Vivian confirmed, carefully gluing construction paper. But I have a lot of help from people who are very good at their jobs, like your dad, who makes sure all our technology works properly. Daddy fixes broken things, Rosie said proudly. He's the best at it. He really is, Vivian agreed, her eyes meeting Caleb's across the kitchen island where they worked. The look she gave him was warm, genuine, full of the vulnerability she was slowly learning to show. They'd been careful about introducing Rosie to their relationship, taking it slow, making sure his daughter understood that Vivian was important, but that nothing would change the bond between father and daughter. Rosie had been skeptical at first, protective of their small family unit, but Vivian's patience and genuine interest had gradually won her over. "Can I tell you a secret?" Vivian asked Rosie conspiratorially. "Yes!" Rosie leaned in, delighted. "Your dad is my hero. Did you know that?" Rosie giggled. "He's just my daddy." "Well, he's that too, but he's also the bravest person I know." Vivian glanced at Caleb again, her expression serious now. "He taught me that it's okay to let people help you, that being strong doesn't mean being alone." "Daddy says that family is the people who stay even when things are hard," Rosie said, parroting something Caleb had told her 100 times. "Your daddy is very wise," Vivian said softly. Later, after Rosie had finished her project and fallen asleep on the couch during a movie, Caleb and Vivian stood on the balcony watching the city lights spread below them like fallen stars. "She's wonderful," Vivian said, leaning against Caleb's side. "You've done an amazing job raising her." "It's been the hardest and best thing I've ever done," Caleb said honestly. "And she likes you, really likes you, which means more to me than I can say." "I like her too." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I never thought I'd have space for this in my life. A relationship, a family, anything beyond the company. But you've shown me that maybe I can have both. That wanting something personal doesn't make me weak. It makes you human," Caleb corrected gently, "which you were always allowed to be." "The board officially dropped all opposition to my leadership last week," Vivian said, changing the subject slightly. "The success of the product launch, the way we handled the crisis, the stock price hitting record highs. They can't argue with results. Richard's gone, the conspirators are awaiting trial, and for the first time since I took over, I actually feel secure in my position." "That's incredible," Caleb said, pulling her closer. "You did that. You survived everything they threw at you and came out stronger." "We survived," Vivian corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you. Literally, I'd be dead without you, but also figuratively. You gave me a reason to fight beyond just proving myself. You made me want to build something that lasted." Caleb kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. "So what comes next? Now that you've conquered the corporate world and survived assassination attempts?" "Now?" Vivian tilted her face up to look at him, her eyes soft in the city lights. "Now I figure out how to build a life instead of just a legacy. With you, if you'll have me." "If I'll have you?" Caleb laughed. "Vivian Voss, I fell for you somewhere between you promoting me out of nowhere and you letting me see you cry. I'm not going anywhere." "Good," she said firmly, "because I'm not letting you go. You and Rosie. You're mine now. If you're okay with that." "More than okay," Caleb promised. They stood there for a long time, wrapped around each other, watching the city that had tried to destroy them both, and had instead given them something neither had expected to find. Vivian Voss, the ice queen who'd learned to thaw, and Caleb Mercer, the maintenance tech who'd fixed more than just broken lights. Inside, Rosie slept peacefully on the couch, safe and loved and completely unaware that her small family had just expanded to include someone extraordinary. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about standing alone, but about having the courage to let the right people stand beside you. The fluorescent light in Caleb's bathroom still needed replacing, but now it felt less like a symbol of everything he couldn't afford and more like a reminder of how far they'd come. He'd fix it eventually. Right now, he had more important things to focus on, like the woman in his arms who trusted him enough to let down every wall, like the daughter sleeping inside who deserved to see her father happy and whole, like the future they were building together, one honest conversation and one brave choice at a time. Caleb had spent 6 years believing his life was about survival, about sacrifice, about doing whatever it took to keep Rosie safe and fed and loved. And it was still about those things. But it was also about this. Standing on a balcony with Vivian Voss, both of them scarred and healing, both of them brave enough to choose vulnerability over protection. "I love you," Vivian whispered into the night air, the words trembling with newness and fear and hope. "I love you too," Caleb said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Below them, Seattle glowed with possibility. Above them, stars fought through the light pollution to be seen, and between them, something fragile and precious and absolutely real took root and began to grow. They'd survived the worst people could throw at them: corporate conspiracies, assassination attempts, betrayal from trusted colleagues, and the weight of expectations that tried to crush them both. They'd stood between each other and ruin twice, and had come through it changed but intact. Now came the harder part: building something that lasted beyond crisis and adrenaline. Learning to be partners in calm moments as well as chaos. Figuring out how to blend Caleb's small, fierce world with Vivian's empire of responsibility. But as Vivian kissed him under the stars, with Rosie sleeping peacefully inside and the future spread before them uncertain and beautiful, Caleb knew they'd find a way. Because they'd already proven the most important thing: that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with a maintenance call and a frosted glass door. That heroes come in work boots and carry tool bags. That the Ice Queen was never ice at all, just a woman waiting for someone brave enough to see past the armor. And that Caleb Mercer, worn-out maintenance tech, single father, invisible man, had been exactly what Vivian Voss needed. Not to fix her, because she'd never been broken, but to stand beside her and remind her that even queens deserve to be seen, to be known, to be loved for who they are beneath the crown. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real.